Welcome to Kinetic Link and Friday, guys, at Maverick Physical Therapy. Today we're going to continue our discussion on where we left off last week in regards to the Transformational Zone number 1 for gait and ambulation and other functional kind of level change activities. So we've all played with dominoes before. Here in front of me, I have a little functional domino kind of setup. We'll see how the cookie crumbles, so to speak, here. Pretty good. It's interesting how dominoes reminds me of that song we sang growing up. What was that again? Oh yeah, that's right. It kind of starts with the toe bones connected to the shin bones connected to the leg bones connected to the hip bones connected to the backbone. To expand on what we talked about a little bit last week and to kind of re-highlight a little bit, we talked specifically in regards to gait, in regards to the foot and the ankle complex. We talked about the biomechanical sequencing that needs to happen and take place when that foot first comes in contact with the ground to absorb the resistance of our body weight as we overcome the effects of gravity, momentum, inertia, and ground reaction force three-dimensionally. We talked about, again, re-highlighting how the calcaneus, it must evert, how that eversion and that dropping down allows the talus to drop down and in. So the midfoot, it starts to load on up. That allows the tibia and the fibula to medially rotate, to spin on in. The talus dropping down on in and the calcaneus everting unlocks that mid-tarsal joint to allow for that eversion, that dorsiflexion, that relative abduction of the mid-tarsal joint, to allow the midfoot and the forefoot to be able to contour to the surface, and the change in terrain that we're walking, running, squatting, moving, hopping, jumping in. We talked about how the midfoot, relatively speaking, will invert, even though the midfoot follows the action and reaction of the rear foot. And we also talked about the rays. We talked about the forefoot, how that first and that second ray will dorsiflex and it will invert. We talked about how the fourth and the fifth ray will invert, but that they will plantar flex. The domino effect right here in the body reminds me of that sequence that must take place throughout the system to optimize consistency and efficiency, and to be able to sustain that over a long duration of time, which is we as humans, recreation and occupational wise, must be able to do very well. Not allowing this domino effect to occur would be like putting a big cement wall right in the middle or in a segment somewhere in between here of this chain kind of reaction. Think of it as a tornado-like effect, a little tunnel-like effect, in that we get the stability and this mobility at a joint and sequence and combination of joints that must travel and must funnel throughout the system for movement to be able to occur, for loading first to be able to occur. So with that being said, physical therapist, being the movement science expert, the primary care physician of the musculoskeletal system, your medical professional and those that you encounter and run into, they must know functional biomechanics. They must know relative motion. They must know what bones are doing and what kind of motion that's creating at joints, connective tissue, muscle-wise. That enables this natural cushioning, shock-absorbing like system to be able to control neuromuscularly the elements of that three-dimensional movement of bones and of those multiple articulating / joint surfaces. Your medical professional must know that. The standard muscle actions that we have once learned need to be thrown out the window, because that's for open kinetic chain type activities, meaning an individual laying on a table assessing muscle function. Movement, as we know, it's a simple basic principle. Movement must occur from a firm and solid base of support. Now, when we have muscle action that was developed back in the 40s and the 50s from cadavers slash proprioceptively deadened individuals, literally people, God bless their souls, not alive or with this earth function-wise any longer, when individuals thought it would be a novel idea to lay this cadaver on the table, take their joint segments to the edge of a table. So let's say the knee, you take the knee to the table to see what the end of the table, to see what the hamstring does. The tibia is off the table, the femoral condyle is still on the table, and let's see what the leg does. Well, the leg drops, the hamstring shortened. Well, they thought it was novel to say that and to make the rule that, okay, well, the function of the hamstrings is to flex the knee. Well, no, not at all. So we need to kind of go back to the drawing board, and so we could sit here and we could talk about the anterior compartment of the leg, we could talk about the lateral and the posterior compartment of the leg. Take us quite some time to kind of do that, but what we need to kind of focus on and be aware of is, again, the activities that we're doing, what we're putting on our feet and what we're putting in our shoes, and what is enabling and what is facilitating, what is disabling this domino-like effect to occur throughout the system. So we need a good proper sequencing three-dimensionally throughout the chain. Today, in part 2 of this little series, I'm going to show you a few of my little tricks, a few more little progressions that build on what we did last week. Those are some basic, fundamental kind of things. I'm going to show you some more today that are going to be a little bit more advanced, a little bit more progressive, that's going to help you and enable you in and amongst your journey as a mover, as a walker, as a runner, as a jumper, a hopper, a squatter, a lunger, as a survivalist, as a human. We will take a look at, and it's super important in terms of origin insertion, those that you run into, those of you that are medical professionals and those of you that are seeking help, that you find someone and or that you know in terms of origin insertion of the posterior, the anterior, the lateral compartment of the leg, as well as the insertion points of all this connective tissue. Again, we're looking to facilitate specific, gross, and point-specific kind of motion, if that makes sense. So we need to know that the gastroc and the soleus, we need to know that the femoral epicondyles is the origination point of the gastroc, and that it meshes into the Achilles tendon, the medial and lateral calcaneal tuberosity, with the soleus, which originates in the soleal line, the interosseous membrane, and the kind of the fibular head. We need to know that the tibialis posterior is going to originate interosseous membrane just inferior to the soleal line, just inferior and deep to the soleus and onto the fibula. We need to know that the flexor digitorum longus is going to originate on that distal kind of half of the posterior tibia. We need to know that the flexor hallucis longus is going to originate on the distal third, the distal half of the fibula. We need to know that that tibialis posterior, the flexor digitorum longus and flexor hallucis longus are going to pass posterior to the medium malleoli, and that the flexor hallucis longus is going to cross and sink on through kind of this little tubercle, this medial and this lateral tubercle of the talus, and pass underneath the substentaculum tali to allow the deceleration of dorsiflexion of the talar joint, eversion of the subtalar joint because of its cross underneath the substentaculum tali, that it's going to decelerate the eversion, dorsiflexion, and relative abduction of that mid-tarsal joint to decelerate that relative inversion of the forefoot, that first ray, and that relative inversion of kind of the midfoot. We need to know that the tibialis posterior, that it inserts to the navicular tuberosity, the plantar aspect of the medial, the intermediate, and the lateral cuneiform, the base of the second, the third, and the fourth ray. We need to know that the flexor digitorum longus will pass posterior to that medial malleoli, and that he will join with the quadratus plantae, which on the plantar aspect of the foot besides the long plantar ligament attaching from the median and lateral calcaneal tuberosity and going to the base of the third and the fifth, third, fourth, and fifth ray, the quadratus plantae will mesh and embed into that flexor digitorum longus tendon to be able to go to the base of the second, third, fourth, and the fifth ray. All super, super imperative to know in terms of function, being able to find a rehab diagnosis if we need to palpate for tenderness. Landmarks need to be very, very specific. They need to be spot on, but we can't miss and lose sight of the point, and that is relative biomechanical efficiency, relative motion, knowing what multiple articulations, multiple joints are doing in sequence with each other so that we get this domino-like effect. We need to know that, as a professional, we need to know that the pronaos longus and the pronaos brevis, their origination, their insertion point, pronaos longus, the kind of the lateral aspect of the fibula, kind of the top third, he's going to pass on down and through the posterior to the lateral malleoli and through the cuboidal kind of groove right here. We need to know that he is going to pass and insert to the base of the first metatarsal in that medial cuneiform, which, coincidentally enough, the tibialis anterior, which originates from that anterior compartment just inferior to Gerdy's tubercle, tibia, fibula, as well as the kind of the interosseous membrane to the base of the first met in the medial cuneiform. We need to know that all this tissue, this connective tissue, this interosseous membrane that's in between the tibia and the fibula needs to be able to be flexible and mobile connective tissue-wise and capsular-wise throughout the talocurl joint, the mid-tarsal joint, the subtalar joint, the tarsal metatarsal kind of joint, so that this mortise, this tibia and this fibula can splay and open up so that the tibia can translate anterior, so forward, over and onto this talus, this ball in the socket joint at the talonavicular junction. We talked about the talus being narrow, more in the back and posterior, and as you move forward over, anterior over that talus, it gets wider. Coincidentally enough, the most stable position for that foot and for that ankle to be in as it translates forward, meaning important to be able to load, to explode. We're going to, in part two, we're going to take a look at upper extremity drivers, what we can do to position the lower extremity with movement of the upper extremity to facilitate this domino-like effect, this chain reaction that we call transformational zone number 1 through gait, level changes, running. We're going to have ourselves a good time. It might provide more questions than it does answers, but it's going to be a good start. We can take and play with this stuff and talk about this stuff all day long. We're going to put it into practice. We're going to run. We're going to play. We're going to have a good time. I want you to think about this domino-like effect. I want you to resort back to episode number 1, in which we talked about this washcloth being the rear foot, the midfoot, and the forefoot, and that ringing out effect in terms of how we absorb the loadings. We absorb the loadings with the washcloth, meaning we gather all the water, and then we need to be able to wring and squeeze it on out. This foot needs to be able to disassociate. We are going to, in further episodes, take a look at shoes. We're going to talk about orthotics and insoles. We're going to talk about bridges. We're going to talk about the human foot. We're going to talk about the butt. We're going to talk about the hip. We're going to talk about the importance of thoracic spine mobility, scapulothoracic, glenohumeral joint / shoulder mobility and function in relation to its effect upon the foot and the ankle, as well as the hip. Alright guys, we're going to play around and have a good time right now. Enjoy your Friday. Kinetic Linking Friday, every Friday. Great time for us to learn a little anatomy, a little biomechanical kind of structuring and stuff like that, and away we go. Have a great day.